How's it going, guys? So, Joseph Parker destroys former European heavyweight champion Alexander Dimitrenko in 3 rounds to retain his #1 ranking with the IBF. It's funny because before this fight, pretty much universally, Alexander Dimitrenko was seen as a big step up in class for Joseph Parker. Yes, he did fight Carlos Takam, who's a very tough, solid fighter. But Dimitrenko was a very different dynamic. He's a very tall heavyweight. He stands at about 6'8". Very long arms. He had a considerable reach advantage over Parker. With him having the superior experience, at being a former European champion, having fought people like Kubrat Pulev, Eddie Chambers, he certainly had the better names on his record. You kind of thought going into this fight, how is Joseph Parker, a guy with such little experience as a professional, how is he going to deal with this? How is he going to look against a guy that's much taller and much more experienced? And I have to say, guys, I was very impressed with Joseph Parker. This was a much better Joseph Parker, in my opinion, than the one that fought Carlos Takam. The one that fought Carlos Takam, I was impressed by his energy and by his ability to deal with the pressure. However, I felt in that fight, Joseph Parker made a lot of little schoolboy errors. There were certain mistakes in that fight that he wouldn't get away with against top level heavyweights. For example, when he was pushed back to the ropes, or even when he's in the center of the ring, he'll be very lazy with his defense, and he'll have his hands down, and he's not really thinking about moving his head. He's just thinking about landing his own punches without being defensively responsible. That was the kind of feeling I got just in spots in that fight, and I think it was just due to a little bit of laziness in there. I've said this in previous videos about Joseph Parker. It's that sometimes he gets a little bit carried away with his offense and becomes defensively lazy. It's just that some little things that I've noticed. But in this fight, there was none of that. In this fight, he was very switched on. His reflexes looked very sharp. He had his guard there ready to use it. He didn't have a tight guard. He's very loose with the way that he fights because it allows him to be a little bit more free with his movement and his punches. But you could tell, he had his hands in a position where if he needed to defend punches, he would do it. He was ready to do it. And I was very impressed by just how switched on he was and how professional he was in this fight. This was a much more professional performance from Joseph Parker than I've seen in previous fights. I mean, because Dimitrenko is a much better fighter than people like Jason Bergman, for example, and what was his name? The other dude that went to the later rounds against Joseph Parker, the tank, Sherman the Tank Williams, that guy. This was a much better performance from Parker than those guys against a better opponent. And it just goes to show some fighters, when they fight guys that are journeymen or guys that they're expected to beat, they tend to be a little bit lazy and don't really take it seriously. But when they get a quality, credible opponent in front of them, then they really shine and you see how good they are. And that's the feeling that I get from Joseph Parker here. I was very impressed by the performance. Like I said, he destroyed a former European champion in 3 rounds. In the first round, you could tell straight away that Joseph Parker was really sitting down on his punches. He seemed to be punching a lot harder in this fight than I've ever seen him before. I think it's to do with his punch technique. He seems to have, kind of tweaked his punch technique a little bit. He's punching a little bit more correctly. Every time he was on the inside, he would shorten that right hand, and he was very accurate with it. He also had a very effective left hook. Didn't use the jab a lot because he didn't really need to use the jab a lot. He was the shorter man fighting the taller guy. Dimitrenko was the guy trying to establish his jab, but he just couldn't do it because Joseph Parker was just so much more sharp with his reflexes. And I was very impressed. Great performance. He finished the fight with a body shot in the third round. Dimitrenko was already hurt prior to that. He'd been down in the fight a few times. In fact, I lost count at the amount of times he touched down. And what Joseph Parker was doing in there was he was kind of mentally and physically breaking Dimitrenko down. He had Dimitrenko falling all over the place. He had Dimitrenko complaining to the referee, and it was just because Dimitrenko just couldn't handle the pace of the fight and just every little subtlety that Joseph Parker was doing in there just had Dimitrenko all over the place. And to see a guy with the kind of experience that Dimitrenko has falling apart like that against a prospect or prospect/contender, it really goes to show you the potential that Joseph Parker has now. He is, of course, the mandatory challenger for Anthony Joshua's IBF title. I don't know who Anthony Joshua is going to fight next. There's some talks that he may be replacing Tyson Fury and fighting Vladimir Klitschko. That's a great fight, guys. Very interesting fight. I might have a video on that fight if it does get made. I have my doubts, but I would like to see it. But Joseph Parker is without a doubt, I think, going to fight Anthony Joshua next year for the IBF title. If that happens, I'll definitely be tuning in. That's a much closer fight now than what I previously thought prior to this fight. Now, I did pick Joseph Parker to win this fight. I did pick him to win by knockout. However, even though the fight, the result that happened was a result I expected, I didn't expect it to be this early on in the fight, and I didn't expect it to be so dominant. I expected there to be certain mistakes from Joseph Parker that he made in previous fights that Dimitrenko may make him pay for at times, but that didn't happen. Like I said, Joseph Parker was so much better in this fight than he's ever been before. And that Anthony Joshua fight, it's not an easy fight. Not an easy fight for Joshua. Going into this fight, I had no doubt that Joshua was probably too much for Parker at this stage. But after this fight, I have to say I think it's a good fight. I'd still favour Joshua, don't get me wrong, but I just think it's a very, very intriguing fight. And after seeing the way that Joseph Parker is forced to perform when he has a good opponent in front of him, it really makes me think that it's going to be a great fight when it takes place. So let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching.